Well, I have to say it. I told you so. I told you you would love Jim Dance preaching and that his sermons would be brief. And don't you prefer to see a preacher with hair so you don't have to squint through the light coming off my head every Sunday? Jim is away getting to know our teenagers. There are well over 100 of them on this trip. In about 12, 15 years, some of them will be taking leadership positions in this church. Others will move on, but will look back on a weekend like this as one of the rarest and best experiences of authentic church they ever had. So say a prayer for them, will you? Say a prayer for them and for all the good that might come from this weekend. This room feels different without our young people here, doesn't it? My kids are in that group, and I wish they were here. They no longer sit still and listen when I preach at home, so this is my only chance. But maybe this is an opportunity for us to hold them in mind, to think about the kind of world in which they are growing up and the kind of ministry they need from us. Our teenagers live in a changed world. While some of you have never been on the internet, our teens cannot remember a day when they weren't online. Many of them are not, believe this or not, many of them are not in a hurry to get their driver's licenses because they can't use their smartphones while they drive. They have different team hobbies from the ones that you may have had. Some of you know that video game sales surpassed Hollywood movie sales over a decade ago. But you may not know that the new sensation is an online channel that, believe it or not, enables them to watch other people play video games. Twitch is the name of a new online TV channel that now has more viewers than most hit TV shows, and it's just people watching people play video games. Our teens are also changing the world. They have been radically empowered. Teens have been creating pop sensations for over 50 years. The difference now is this: their generation can self-organize to do it. Last year, the ALS Association raised $3 million. But this year, the Ice Bucket Challenge that our staff and many of you have participated in has raised over $100 million. Why? Because it became the thing to do among young people. I wonder this morning if some of you feel that their world is so different from ours, from the one we knew as teens, that we've given up on the possibility that we might have something to offer them, and that in thinking that way we might forfeit the chance to forge relationships with them that could make a real difference. But our teens need more guidance, not less. And one of the reasons that they do is the historic change in the religious landscape. When I was an itinerant musician traveling from church to retreat center to conference hall, I often didn't know until I got there what sort of ecclesiastical culture I would find myself. Even among Baptists, I never knew if I was in for snake handling or high liturgy, or a downtown mainline church or Southern Gospel cable access church. I never knew whether to expect xenophobic preaching and an invitation to the rifle range shootout, or a transgender proclaimer inviting us all to the Equal Rights March later that afternoon. Even among Baptists, I never knew if it would be fundamentalism or secular humanism, whether it would be a no drinks in the sanctuary kind of church, or a let me bring you a triple latte during the praise service kind of church. I didn't know whether there would be choir robes and an organ, or a rock band with video, praise choruses or traditional hymns, or, in many places, all original songs written by the band, which would have made it impossible for a visitor like me to sing along, of course, were it not for the fact that the songs were more mantra than melody. Where will our teenagers wind up? Last year at a conference in Toronto, I asked the ministers I met there what was new and exciting for them. They patiently and politely explained that they really saw their ministries there as palliative care, referring to the medical treatment that addresses the symptoms and the pain of an illness that may be too serious to actually cure. They saw themselves providing palliative care for churches that would not exist in a few years. I was bothered by what seemed to me to be their defeatist attitude, but as I walked down the street, a sign in a hairdresser's window trumpeted, "Sunday is the new Saturday." And everywhere I looked was another sign of a culture kicking religion to the curb. We are all confronting postmodernity, being reminded that we too represent but one subculture in a world bazaar of subcultures, and we can no longer assume anything or take anything for granted. How strange it is to live in a time when Germany is an ally and Russia, once an ally against Germany, is on the march. When hundreds of those traveling to fight with ISIS are actually American citizens. When there are major cities in America, like Houston, Texas, that have no racial majority of any kind. When thousands of Southern Baptist churches are closing every year. When, after 9 years and 6 children, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie have actually gotten married. Surely that's a sign of the last days. What's next? This new millennium has brought us not just a post-denominational era, or as some say, a post-Christendom era. It feels to many of us like a post-everything era. Where does a Christian witness begin? Where do we even begin in a society like this? Where do we start? These post-everything changes are well represented even inside this church. Our senior adult classes are as Baptist as it's possible to be, still singing as we did Blessed Assurance this morning, written in 1873. But our young adults may have little or no church background at all, or even if they do, would never think to describe their spirituality with lyrics like visions of rapture, angels descending, and being washed in the blood. Some visitors tell us that they are coming to see us not because Mama's mama was a Baptist, but because they need a middle ground between her Pentecostalism and his Catholicism, between his conservatism and her liberalism, between her Bible Belt upbringing and his Rust Belt upbringing. Wave goodbye to your stereotypes. This is just a friendly warning. If we don't start divesting ourselves of the language and the thinking that lumps people together and categorizes them and makes assumptions about them, not only will we be perceived as bigots, but we will betray our ignorance, because whatever stereotypes you have about certain types of people, mark my words, the next person you meet is going to be the exception that proves you wrong. That's just the world we live in. And that's the world in which our teenagers are growing up and through which they need us to guide them. When we say every member a minister, that means this is partly your job. Just as our ministry to one another is partly your job, and our outreach to the community is partly yours. So where will you begin? What will you say? That question is foremost in Paul's mind in Acts 17:15. Here he is, once an oppressor of the church, now a missionary of the church, walking around Athens in dismay, overwhelmed by the way the religious landscape is already claimed and parceled out like the skin of a NASCAR race car, every hilltop capped with a temple, every nook and cranny downtown filled with an idol to make sure no God is left out. Was there really any point in putting up yet another shingle in this religious free-for-all? Where to begin? Verse 16 says, Paul wandered the streets of Athens deeply distressed. Temples devoted to mere superstition were wonders of the ancient world. And what did he have? Empty pockets, a story that strained credulity, a message that would be foolishness to these Greeks, an invitation to die? Even with his passionate devotion to Christ, Paul had a moment of crushing despair, standing in the shadow of these great monuments to pagan certainties. And then he saw something unexpected. An idol marked for the unknown God. He walked right by it at first. There were idols everywhere after all. You couldn't make a U-turn in your toga without knocking one over. But then he went back and he stood there staring and thinking. And then it washed over him a moment of inspiration that sent a chill down his spine. This was it. The hidden door, the way in. You see, when Paul discovered the idol to the unknown God, he found that one piece of uncharted spiritual geography where they had left room for wonder, an actual altar confessing the limits of human knowledge and technology, the limits of Greek philosophy and their established religions. And there he saw his opening, a crack in the wall of certitude through which the light could come through and people could glimpse the mystery of God. He claimed that place of mystery, as the only truly holy place. And he named that God of mystery as the only true God, the life giver. We search and grope for God, he said. But God is not far from us. When I was in college, I tried to make my case for God with people by arguing theology. It always devolved into a wild goose chase of Socratic philosophizing and intellectual one-upsmanship in which I tried to get people to see God my way. But who cares? Why should anybody care about my opinions? And then I worked in the music business, and I saw them try to evangelize by manipulating emotions to get to the heart or to get to the pocketbook through the heart. They used to say, if they cry, they buy. Today I look back and think, why wouldn't there be a backlash against Christendom? Don't you resent being told what to think? Don't you resent being manipulated? Paul's wisdom was in allowing others to see God their way, honoring the experiences they had, and giving a name to those experiences for which they could not find words. Rather than being an adversarial evangelist, he validated the encounters they had with God in temples not made with hands. And soon their Parthenon began to look tiny beneath the expanse of God's sky. St. Gregory of Nyssa said, concepts create idols. Concepts create idols. Only wonder comprehends. People kill one another over idols, he said. Wonder makes us fall to our knees. Most religion tries to offer not faith, but answers. Answers for everything. Answers that create a comforting certitude that helps fearful people sleep better. But answers can be idols and enemies of faith, which is precisely not having all the answers, but being sure of what we hope for, which is that in the final analysis, we can surrender control to a God we don't fully understand, except that God is worthy of trust. Our hope is that we can lose ourselves in God. And the closest thing we get to that, this side of dying, is wonder. That's why Paul ends his sermon on Mars Hill describing the resurrection of Jesus to those logic-obsessed Greeks and offering them no explanation. Only an invitation to kneel before the mystery of it. Children have no trouble with this. They seek out wonder. Sandra Corder told me she used to get calls from one of her little grandchildren asking if the sun was shining in her yard too. Jesus said we will never see the kingdom of God until we look for it with that sense of wonderment. Our teenagers stand now between that childhood of wonder and adult-sized disillusionment. Paul's insight was to trust that the Athenians had been children once too, and they had already encountered God, because God, verse 28, is the one in whom we live and move and have our being. In a far more brutal and threatening world than ours, the first missionary honored the experience of total strangers, trusting that God had already gone before him. And that is faith. God is already revealed. And Paul can start there. And so can we. Simone Weil wrote, "The love of our neighbor in all its fullness simply means being able to say, 'What are you going through?' What are you going through?" And I think that is the place to start being church in a post-everything world. It is the doorway to friendship with a teenager or a stranger or someone on another continent with whom you feel you have nothing in common and to whom you don't know what to say. Ask, how is it with you? Where's the struggle for you? How is God most real to you? What is God saying, doing, asking in your life? Today it's you and I wandering through Athens. It's you and I, Christians in a strange land with empty pockets and a crazy story to tell. It's you and I looking for the hidden door to hearts and minds of a people who will worship any idol that helps them sleep better in the face of their fears. And here, every member is a minister. So let's not go peddling certainties. Let's not use borrowed words or religious pretense because we don't know what else to say. Let's have the grace to ask and to listen first, trusting that God has already been revealed in every life. Let's allow our own wonder to do the preaching. Let's tell our teenagers that they are already the light of the world and the salt of the earth, and they don't have to earn that. Let's go tell those who know poverty and grief and injustice that they are already blessed. They just don't know it yet. Let's go remembering that it's not all up to us, that God goes before us, the author of all we cannot do and the finisher of all we leave undone. But please, for the love of God and in the name of Christ, let's go.